Hello, everybody. My name is Vesna Poslončec-Petrić from Faculty of Geodesy, University of Zagreb, and with me is my colleague Ana Kuveždić Divjak. We will moderate this session, and we are very pleased that we were able to organize this session with European Research Executive Agency, linking Earth observation, business and academia with research program of European Union, especially Horizon 2020 program, which is playing very important role in fostering development of the Earth observation sector in Europe and supporting both academia and business. Therefore, we are extremely pleased that we have today with us Mr. Marko Curavić, Head of Unit Space Research in Research Executive Agency of the European Commission. Welcome, Mr. Curavić. At very beginning, let me read your short CV for conference participant. As I said, Mr. Curavić is Head of Unit Space Research in Research Executive Agency of the European Commission. The unit administers the space research part of Horizon 2020 program, supporting European research to develop innovative technology for scientific, public and commercial purpose and strengthening the competitiveness of Europe's space sector. Between May 2009 and May 2020, Marko was the head of unit entrepreneurship and social economy in Directorate General Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs in European Commission. As such, he was engaged in establishment of European exchange program Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs, the promotion entrepreneurial education, the support of women entrepreneurs, and the fostering of second chance for honest bankrupt entrepreneurs. Before joining the European Commission, Marko worked inter alia as investment officer in the ICT sector for the International Financial Corporation, World Bank Group in Istanbul, Turkey, as assistant director of strategy for the Croatian telecommunication, Deutsche Telekom Group in Zagreb, Croatia, and with McKinsey and Company in Munich, Germany. His main area of professional interest are entrepreneurship, venture financing, tech and business innovation, change management, and human research development. Marko holds degrees in business administration from Free University Berlin and an MBA from Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. Dear Mr. Curavić, the floor is yours.
So, thank you very much for the introduction, Vesna and Ana, and thank you for the invitation to present here our experience with EO space research. First of all, to check, do you hear me all well? Do you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you for the opportunity to present our experience with space research and give a few lessons for future applicants in Horizon Europe. I'll first start with, as a good European official, with a disclaimer saying, okay, we are the executive agency for the European Commission, which means we are the arm that is carrying out the program implementation. So we are not responsible for political decisions, and the lessons or the experiences with research, EO space research and presenting, you can see them through the lens of what works and what does not work. It does not necessarily mean that the political decision makers in the now Director General Defense, Industry and Space, will need or have to take over our suggestions. The same holds true for the upcoming program committee. We just, as I said, we have said what works, what doesn't work in space research, and it's up then to them to draw the conclusions out of it. The same thing holds also true for the lessons for the future applicants. I can say what worked in the past and what didn't work in the past. However, it depends very much on how the new program will be designed and implementation rules, so that it might be that some of the lessons will still be valid and some other ones will have to adapt. So it's, let's say this disclaimer I have to make at the beginning, and also to be very pragmatic, because we are really the people who do the implementation on the ground, but do policy feedback and policy support then to the decision makers in the Commission and the member states which are in the program committee. So with this disclaimer at the beginning, I'll look a little bit into what have we done in the EO space research in Horizon 2020, and tell you what has worked, what has not worked. Also that, as a matter of fact, in the 7 years, our work has evolved. So what made sense in 2014 does not necessarily make sense anymore in 2020, because us and our beneficiaries have learned. And this learning has also resulted in a development, and therefore different projects that made sense in 2014 now have to be looked at from a more evolved and more sophisticated standpoint. But let me dig a little bit into just an overview of the Copernicus space projects in the last 6 years, or 7 years, 7 calendar years. We have here not the last call for proposals, the 2021, which we have just evaluated, or we were still evaluating this week. But overall, if you look at 2014 to 2019, there were a total of 61 projects, less than in the FP7, or there were 104 projects. And you see also here the total EU contribution. It's actually covered, let me just, so we had a total EU contribution. You can read the number, I cannot read the number, but it's, so, apologize, I don't know it by heart. What is maybe important, if you look at the left pie, the biggest part was of the project was in EU downstream. Also, if you look at the budget, it's the second biggest slice. So Horizon 2020 is much more focused on implementation, on market-ready products and services, and this has been a very strong element in EO and also a very strong requirement. Then if you look at the number of projects, the second largest is service evolution. Also in terms of budget, it's even the highest slice, the biggest slice. Again, it goes hand in hand with the downstream. It means that really the focus is on being pragmatic and produce solutions for member states administration or public administration, for companies, and maybe even for, in some cases, for private citizens. So we're looking very much into an impact on the ground, and not only research that then would be the basis for future development. Now, if we here, I'm just going a little bit quickly through a few projects that we have made. I mean, you might know some of those names. You will get the slides from the organizer of the conference, and you can have a deeper look into it. And if you have a question, you can come back to us and ask about certain projects, or maybe you know some of those projects. You can also look up each of those projects on their websites. Each of them has their own website with a description of the project, with a description of the progress of the project, and also with the list of all the participating beneficiaries. So you can go deep into it if you're interested in, okay, what has happened in land or emergency or climate and CO2 and so on. And I have a second slide with some projects, additional projects. So you can have quite a good idea by looking at those projects what has been done. Now I'm going a little bit deeper into the experiences. So call it also what works, what doesn't work. And I'm going from the work program from a more strategic point of view then into more operative aspects of it. And if you look at the work program, what has evolved throughout time, and I think this is something that really at the beginning where there were more degrees of freedom, there was also more freedom to decide what to do. Or more freedom to see what one could produce. But I think with time, as products and services have been already down there, produced and offered, I think especially in Horizon Europe, it would make sense to have more specific requests how those new services and products could look like, because now we know what is covered and where there are gaps. Also, in that context, given that we have a better idea how much the operations of the project cost, I think we would need a better forecasted budget for operations. And very important, since, as I said, Horizon 2020 is very close to the market, should be very close to the market. The assessment of the maturity or the maturity level, technological readiness level of the products and services at the end of the project should be defined better or even set as an objective. So this assessment of the maturity should be much stricter. Since many of those projects that we are co-financing deal with services that are important for the public authorities, we think that the IPR transfer or rights to use it by a entrusted entity or the commission to use it publicly should be defined also much stricter in the work program, so that it's clear that this can be used by the broader public administration in Europe. And last but not least, we have seen that sometimes research and innovation actions versus so-called coordination support actions maybe have not always been chosen rightly, in the sense that sometimes it should have been research why it would have been better to be just a support action or vice versa. It's maybe more technical detail and not necessarily important for potential applicants. And I guess most of you are potential applicants. Now, if you look at the project implementation, you know that there are so-called entrusted entities that are running the services for the European Commission. Those are public, mostly public, and also international organizations, like the European Center for Mid-Range Weather Forecasts. They do mostly the work on climate change and on CO2 and the atmosphere. And we think that we need a little bit more definition of how cooperation with those entities works, to really have a strong alignment of the project's activities, hands-on, daily activities, and the expectations what the services at the end should deliver. But also to have a smooth operational transition when those activities reach the requested level of maturity and they're handed over to the entrusted entities. Then looking at policy feedback, we think that it would help if the REA or whoever will be managing such projects in the future would give regular feedback to the Copernicus Committee and User Forum about what has been achieved and what is still missing. Because this is, again, this will be a 7-year program, and very often throughout the time, new insights and new results change the perspective and what should be done. Also, very often, if we go beyond the objectives that we wanted to achieve, then the bar should also be set higher. And this works when there is a stricter or more structured policy feedback. Interestingly enough, within the Commission, policy feedback from the executive agencies has been strengthened because we have seen that this operational division between policy decision and implementation makes sense from an economic point of view and from an operational point of view, but that we have to work together when it comes to policy development and to decision making. And so the feedback that we are giving to our so-called parent or partner DG, as I said, it's now the new Director General of Defense Industry and Space, has been ramped up. And I think it's going to be beneficial also for Horizon Europe, although Horizon Europe still is work in progress, I have to say. Gaps. What has been missing? We have seen that some services have not been covered as well as they could or should, for example, security services. And I'm just guessing that, for example, emergency or the atmosphere are in the public domain, and therefore there's less interest from private companies to engage in this, because there's maybe also less direct market to be covered immediately. But then also sometimes we saw that there was some competition among services. So there should be much more division of labor so that we have a broad coverage instead of overlapping in some areas and leaving some areas uncovered. Then Copernicus is not the only area which is looking at Earth observation. So we think that there should be much more cooperation with other services. Well, this holds true not only for within the European Commission, because besides the Director General Defense Industry and Space, we have also Director General Environment, Director General Home, Director General Climate that are interested, Director General Research and Innovation, the Joint Research Center, but also across member states and regions even. And this is then the last component, the in situ component, to be able to do a coverage of calibration validation activities together with member states authorities on the ground, and also help them with our products and services to support, update, or even upgrade their in situ assets, blend instruments, and also be very complementary, because member states are working in those same areas, but they're using, for example, their own financial means, or they're using regional development means. So we think that overall, given that Earth observation has come to a high level of maturity, now integration with different actors and instruments plays a much higher role than before, when we were doing, let's call it, more basic research and development. Now, if you look more at the downstream, we can also call the market uptake projects. We see that land has had the biggest slice. And within land, then there were three big slices: inland water, agriculture, and forestry, which seems also to be quite logical. And then the second largest slice was marine, and their coastal services were the biggest ones. And aquaculture and maritime were the second biggest one. So land monitoring, agriculture, and so on were quite strong. What have we learned from the downstream market uptake projects? Coming more from the research community, we think that Horizon 2020 could have looked more at market opportunity, at the business opportunities, at business plans, at exploitation, at how the actual, let's say, technically quite well organized or quite well developed services should be marketed. We think that compared, and okay, let's put that, it's more my own personal opinion, having also experienced how things work in the US. I think that what we are often missing in Europe is this stronger link with people from the business or with the business or product development background, who quite naturally, or whose main job it is to establish this connection between products and service development and actual business. So we think that there should be a much stronger stress also on the business market opportunity element. And sometimes, given that the market is very dynamic, develops very quickly, shorter projects, more to the point projects would be more helpful than bigger, more encompassing projects. And in this context, we think that business expertise is something that needs to be developed and fostered. It's not all about the technical brilliance of the projects, but also about the actual placing on the market. In that context, obviously, placing on the market means also what kind of impact should there be in terms of helping businesses, public administration, citizens to improve their business or lives, and how far they should go. And then actually also, if you place such a service on the market, this also means that you should see, okay, what's the cost benefit maybe of those concrete projects. If you don't have a good cost benefit, you cannot sell your service, obviously. A very important element, and we have had only one project, is pre-commercial procurement. It was called EO Marine. And we think that pre-commercial procurement, it means that public administrations partner with research institutions, mostly research institutions, and also businesses, to test or pilot a new solution, a new service, a new product. So before it comes on the markets, a public administration says, we are willing to be a pioneer, to go a step forward and see whether a certain type of service can help us to solve our problems. Now, what we found out is that since this is really a pilot where somebody in the public administration is taking a courageous step forward, it should be very focused. It should be focused so that it's very concrete. It focuses on a very specific need, because if not, the project spreads too thin, and at the end, none of the participants really is satisfied. But if you prove it in one or two places that the service works, you can more easily replicate it as the first step, and the second step also then adapt it maybe to the needs of a different administration that does need exactly the same thing. Those are quite comprehensive projects, so the budgets are higher. And also the number of contractors should be, let's say, big enough to cover the needs, but not too big to make the whole project manageable. So the topics should be very specific, not a bottom-up approach, because then we get a little bit of a Christmas tree approach. And it should also be then supported to establish connections and to identify further potential topical areas. As I said, we have had only one project so far. We are quite happy with it, but obviously we think we would need more to learn about other aspects. However, especially in the public sector where you have very few authorities in some cases, sometimes even one authority per member state, to use those services, if you don't have somebody who is a pioneer, it's difficult to get the others on board, and it's also difficult to put together a first financially viable business model. So therefore, we think that this is a very promising road to go down to, but it needs really some specific efforts and specific care from also the work program and the policy side. If you look at the project implementation, so much more what happens on the ground every day, sometimes also, let's say, in the standard projects, sometimes it seems that the downstream projects do not benefit always from the Copernicus product development, and that the border between the core and the downstream is not clear. So that instead of being an input provider, sometimes the service could also be seen as a competitor. So building a value chain instead of having unclear relationships or competitive relationships would be very important. Again, to close gaps and have a comprehensive coverage instead of being overlapping. Then data warehousing. We think that there is still to be worked on that, so that we see what does a sustainable operational service or product need in terms of data set, what are the costs, and how does this regard to business model. So what is the data base for a sustainable and successful business model? And then we had the DIAS platforms, which at the time of the beginning of the work program were still in development themselves, but now they are quite far advanced, and we think that there should be a more use of our own 5 European DS platforms instead of the other commercial providers. If there is a problem in terms of feasibility, accessibility, maybe even cost, if you really want to have our European solution, I think it makes sense to have the data sovereignty. Then we will probably also need to support this with different measures, although it might also cost us some money. So the offer of the various DS platforms is not of as much appeal as we thought, although they have been, as I said, evolving. And therefore, we think that we need to foster more this cooperation, especially now. Even Corona has shown that it's not good to outsource everything outside of Europe. So I think there is a political objective behind it that also justifies some additional costs. What we have seen is that since many of the first low-hanging fruit or obvious areas are now covered, that maybe new market sectors should be looked at. Gaps, especially the public sector, is probably still something to be worked on, with obviously the disclaimer that, as I said, the public sector, there are very often not so many biases in the private sector, so the business models have to be carefully calibrated and developed, and also then maintained throughout time. And besides pre-commercial procurements, there could be also other types of innovation procurements, maybe even to newly develop and experiment. And we think with the level of maturity that we have now achieved, there should be also more international dimension. For the first time, the international dimension has been targeted in the 2019 call. We have, in the meantime, partners from Africa, US, and Australia even. And we think that this is the way to go down, because many of the problems we have are either international in terms of climate change and environmental protection, but also in terms of giving a stronger impact to our development policy supported, and also to give developing countries a stronger push towards upgrading the exploitation of Earth observation data. So for the future, at least I think that there is a lot of potential in the international cooperation to go much further. That could be even, doesn't have to be always far away countries like mentioned here. Very often, I think neighboring countries, associated countries, offer not only quite a lot of potential, but also a need, because if the region is neighboring, problems are really concerning those countries as much as the EU. So, strategy of service evolution, as I said, and also a little bit interspersed throughout my whole presentation, the services are evolving quite fast. Technologies are evolving quite fast. So we think that more than between 2014 and 20, or even before an FP7, we would need quite a strong accompanying element, for example, coordination support action, that would really look at how Earth observation Copernicus is evolving and give rather quick, have rather short feedback loop, or give rather quick feedback to really, within those 7 years, be much more focused on fine-tuning, adapting the work program, and then go after what has come out as a new priority, or adapt to the technological change. And in this sense, then also redirect funding after, let's say, maybe 2 or 3 years, every 2 to 3 years, to really get the best impact out of the budget that we'll have available. So we would have a definition, obviously, at the beginning of the program where we want to go down a roadmap, but also have these regular updates. And from our side, at least, from the research executive agency, or we will change, our unit will change to the new agency for SMEs, digital and health, we would also be willing, and we will be willing, to support furthermore our colleagues who are working on the policy and the work programs. especially also with the feedback that we are bringing in from the projects that we're supervising throughout the lifetime. So this is, let's say, the end of the first part, with this strong call to really focus even more on the strategy and to fine-tune it, because we have seen that changes are coming now much more faster than before, and that the research and innovation is really accelerating even more. And as I said before, also in the market entry commercialization in downstream even more, we think that there is a need to bolster the economic, business, product development capabilities of the consortia by also giving them either concrete supporting measures like coaching, training, giving them also measures like access to incubators or to accelerators, help them develop pre-commercial procurement instruments, help them develop contracts, help them develop agreements with the public authorities, and help them then with such an approach to also penetrate markets that are either less attractive or with products that are maybe very useful but less profitable. It's both. Let's say it's two sides of the same coin. Definitely, we think that we should keep the EO techniques beyond the state of the art. We have got quite positive feedback, because when we started the whole Copernicus program, especially internationally, there was quite some skepticism. Now, other countries have said, respect how far we have come. Your Copernicus system is unique, very valuable. It produces very important data and insights, and it's been a long way since we started this, but we have shown that really Europe in this area is top. We want to keep this. We want to keep this, and also obviously more and more make it economically sustainable and viable. So one element is the strategic view, to keep it overall and where to use it, but the other is also to strengthen the economic or business side of it, because the longer we are going down that road, I think the more we would also need to make it really something that is in many areas sustainable and doesn't have to be subsidized. So much about the experience with EO space research. A little bit the takeaways from 6 years of application, and what works, what doesn't work. Now, going to the lessons for applicants, it's more down to earth. What I mean by this is, okay, we have on average, and as I said, we are just right this week finishing the 7th call for proposals. So we have had 7 years of proposal evaluation and then later on project management. And I guess that many of the participants here are future applicants in Horizon Europe. And I would like a little bit to tell you what works, what doesn't work when you want to apply for a project. We have on average evaluated about 200 or even a little bit more projects per year. So those are very short lessons learned from about 1,400 or even 1,400 plus project proposals over 7 years. But let me start with a disclaimer. As I said, as a good public official, I have to do it. The Space Work Program for Horizon Europe and the pertaining implementation modalities are work in progress. We do not know yet how they will look like. So if we make assumptions about how they will look like, they're just assumptions at this moment. And therefore, whatever we say about the work program and the implementation modalities, it's too early. So the lessons that I'm describing here and after are really based on the experience from the past, from Horizon 2020, and they're indicative, they're illustrative, and exemplary only. You cannot, and please do not take it as advice about how to apply to a concrete call in Horizon Europe. It's more principles. I want to illustrate principles that are, let's say, good application practices overall. I also worked before I came to the space unit in entrepreneurship, and there we also had quite a number of project proposals for about 5 years. So the principles that I'm mentioning, the principles apply across all different calls for proposals of the European Commission. And then, as I said, because we don't know how concretely the work program will look like, when the actual work program and the implementation rules will be published, you have to really carefully study each detail relevant for the call so that you really know on what to focus. And I mean, you'll get it also when I'm now going to talk a little bit about those principles, that this is really the core. Now, this is illustrative because we don't know what the eligibility criteria will be in the future. But take one important thing or one important message with you. All our projects are European projects, and they have to create European value added. So only in exceptional cases, like when you see these coordination support actions in Horizon 2020, it would be enough to have one legal entity from one member state or associated country. As a rule, to create European value added, you have to have a minimum number of entities participating from different member states or associated country, and they have to be independent of each other. So if you have a group, a company group that is established in a number of member states, it would not be fair game to be in this group and have, for example, 4 companies from the same group from 4 different member states, because it would be still the same group and they wouldn't be independent of each other. So very simple and I probably you know it all, but nevertheless I'm mentioning it. You will have to work across Europe to be even eligible for a project, and I think this will not change in Horizon Europe for sure. The question will be just maybe the number of entities, and at the beginning, you will have different associated countries than you have today, because the associated countries have all to sign their agreements with the European Union. The second thing is evaluation criteria. Again, we don't know how the criteria will look like, but in Horizon 2020, we have 3 criteria. Excellence, so how good is your idea? Impact, how much would the realization of this idea change the world? How much would it change it to the better if it was applied? And the third is, are you able to apply it? Are you able to implement it on the ground? So there were 3 criteria, and you had to be good or very good or even top. I would say very good or top in all the 3 criteria to get a high score. Why? First of all, because there was a threshold for each of those criteria, but second of all, because competition was quite tough. In space, depending on which topic was addressed, between, let's say, 8 to 20% of the applicants got through and got funded. So the chances were there, but they were not exuberant. They were not bad either compared to some other projects, but you had to do quite some hard work. So the second element is, whatever the criteria will be in the future program, Horizon Europe, you have to be very good or top in all 3 or 4 or how many criteria there will be. You cannot afford to be weak in any of the criteria. That's also a very important point. And connected to that, so if you have to be good in all those criteria, what is really key is quality. Quality, quality, quality. You have to demonstrate what you'll do, excellence. You have to demonstrate why it will be impactful and how you'll do it. So this is something that you really have to bear in mind, no matter what project you will be in, no matter what you will be working on. Quality, 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 and believe me, it is quite difficult given that competition is sometimes tough. But on the other hand, even first comers have made it. So it's not impossible. What is a good idea is, since you will have to be in the consortium, if you are not very experienced, if it's your first time or maybe your second or third time, try to join in a consortium where you have more experienced institutions so that you don't have to do the learning on your own, but you learn from your partners. And if you look at quality as the key to success, you have to do a lot of reading. And coming back to the last point of the first slide in this chapter, you really have to understand the rules, so the implementation rules. You have to understand the work program, the content of the call, which comes out of the work program, and you have to understand the evaluation criteria. It is not only paying off, but it is mandatory to understand the whole framework, because then what you will do is, when you understand the framework, you will connect, as this slide shows, the topics on the left-hand side, which are described by the work program, which say what is the specific challenge, what is the scope, what is the expected impact, how do you want to make it come true, with the criteria, with the evaluation criteria. So basically, your project proposal will say, okay, you want me to show in excellence this and this. This is how I respond to your requirements. You want to show me an impact that you can create impact. This is how I will create impact. And so on and so on. So I said the example here is using the criteria from Horizon 2020. But basically, no matter how the calls will look like, it is, how to say it, it is absolutely necessary that you can show that each criterion, each piece of the program, you can respond to it, and that you can respond to it in high quality and also in a very clear language, because you have a limited number of pages. I don't know whether the number of pages will be reduced or be increased, but we have had 70 pages for research and innovation actions in Horizon 2020. I have mentioned a couple of times that there has been a lot of focus to improve the business part, that we still think that there is a gap to it. I suppose that this will continue to be an important element. In any case, given that most of the participants come more from the research sector, business is very often a weak point or a weak element in the proposals. I think it makes a lot of sense to invest into business knowledge, and also to have somebody on board in the consortium who comes from the business background, from product development, and who can then really strengthen that part. Very often the research technological elements are quite strong, quite good, but this specific business thinking is still missing. So I think it will probably be quite important not to neglect this. And now I'm going into very specific detail. No matter how the financial rules will look like, no matter what kind of specific regulations we will have, very often our applicants were in the budget part quite murky, quite unspecific, quite general. And I'm just saying, look at below at the end of the page. If you have, we have had an average budget of about 2.5 million euros per project. Some were 1 million, some went up to 4 million approximately. But if you have 2.5 million as an average, and you take that somebody gives you one budget item, 650,000 euros, which is about 25% of the total budget, a little bit more even, as one item without explaining what it consists of, this is clearly a no-go, because it does not signal to us that the consortium will know what they will do with the money. Or if they know what they will do with the money, they haven't let us know. And this opens up questions or doubts. So I think that another element, and this is the part implementation, or was the part implementation Horizon 2020, be very careful about laying out your budget and financial planning, because this shows that you have the project under control. You should not only be intellectually excellent, but you should also show that you know how to make these things come true and that you have each element under control. Obviously, finances is one of the most important elements. Now, to be wrapping up and to give you a few overarching tips. So understand the domain and the challenges. Read very carefully the work program, understand what it is about, what problem does the Commission want you to solve, what is the issue where we want you to produce impact. It is always something where we have a public interest, obviously, but you should be also in scope and your objectives within what we want. You shouldn't be covering only, let's say, 80% of what we want you to do. You should cover 100%. And sometimes it really depends on how careful you do the reading. Be clear and explicit. There is a limited number of pages. There's a limited time to evaluate your projects. Especially now after the Brexit, you will be all at the same level regarding the language. I mean, Ireland has English as a native language, so to say, official language, Malta. But overall, you'll be competing with everybody who, as you, doesn't have English in most cases as a native language. So you are all in the same boat. But this doesn't mean that you should not be very careful about explaining in a very clear and easy to understand language what you are going to do. Unclear expressions, unclear descriptions do not help. Therefore, you should do a mock evaluation. You should let somebody, for example, read the proposals who is not involved in your concrete project, but who knows the area and who knows how a project proposal is evaluated. At the end of the day, you will be able to give your colleague the criteria of the new program. And so they can read your proposal, assess it in comparison to the criteria and tell you, okay, this is clear, this is well structured, I understand what you want to do, and it makes sense, or no, it is not exactly responding to criteria, it's a little bit murky and difficult to understand. Optimize the available time. You need to take a lot of time to put together a consortium and write a very good proposal. So start early. The best practice is that to start even before a call for proposal is published, to look at the different potential partners in the consortium, because the work program gets published before the call for proposal gets published, so you have an idea already what actually should be the topics that you should cover. So start working early that you can work on the draft and again to fine-tune it. Submit it on time. We have only electronic submission. If you want to submit 10 minutes before the deadline, you might have problems with your own IT structure. There might be problems with the connection with your telecom services provider. I would advise everybody to submit 24 hours earlier to be on the safe side. I don't know whether resubmissions will be possible, but if so, you should check whether the state of the art has changed, or maybe the calls have changed the text slightly, so that you have that the first reading not seen it. In any case, adapting to the call text and looking at the state of the art is important, because things are progressing very fast. You should, in any case, ask a national contact point to help you, because those are the linking pin between the Commission and you. And the national contact points are very familiar with the procedure, the content, what is asked for, what are the standards, implicit or not, and they can really help you to do it. You can also, and you should, I think this will still be possible, let us see the abstract of your proposal. We will obviously not tell you anything, but what is our task, and will be in the future, I'm quite sure, our task will be to identify the best possible expert for the evaluation. In case of space, I have to say it is a small community, so the search of experts is sometimes quite a challenge, because many of the experts are either themselves involved in writing a proposal, or have worked for a competitor or are working for the same institution. And to avoid conflicts of interest, we start looking for experts quite early in the process. The earlier we know what project proposals will about, the earlier we can also start looking for good experts, which will then increase the probability that really the evaluation is top of the tops in terms of quality. So, as I said, those are all illustrative examples. I think that the principles more or less will be applicable also to you in Horizon Europe. And I hope that this will help you to be on your toes when the new calls come out. They will probably come out only in 2021. And then I hope that we will get many good proposals and then many interest from all of Europe and the newly associated countries. So thank you very much for coming in, listening in, and I'm available for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Curavić, for sharing your experiences with EU space research in Horizon 2020. It was very interesting to have a closer look at examples of Copernicus space projects illustrated in this presentation. It seems that for now there are no questions from the audience. We are still inviting, if there are anybody interested, to submit their question just below the presentation slides. But in the meanwhile, maybe it would be very interesting to hear more on maybe small countries' experiences. So obviously Horizon 2020 is supporting European research and global competitiveness of the European businesses. So this is also resulting with the fact that researchers and research institutions from small EU country members find very hard to participate in the Horizon 2020. What is your experience and what could you maybe advise for small country research how to participate? Are there any other principles that you would like to share with us in this particular case?
It is true that in Europe, the 5 biggest member states have also the biggest concentration of research and industry regarding space. But I can tell you that there are a number of member states that are not so big, but that participate quite successfully in the calls, or have participated quite successfully in the calls. I can mention Greece, I can mention Portugal, I can mention Belgium, for example. They have an infrastructure of a number of companies and research institutes and universities that have specialized in those areas and are quite regularly members of consortia or even consortium leaders. And I think that each country should take what they have. Okay, maybe in a certain country it's only a handful of institutions that are qualified for the time being. Some countries have startups that come from, let's say, really from nowhere and just come in because they're very good. But I think each member state has this, if maybe only small number of potential candidates. What we have seen is that even smaller member states have taken a very decisive public approach. So the national contact points that are most often a national space agency or a national research agency or maybe university that is leading, and they have organized meetings, conferences, information sessions, and worked hard with the potential participants to at the end get enough critical mass. So the more applicants you have, the bigger is the chance that at the end somebody will come through. Obviously, if the applicants are high quality. So one thing is that you go through your country, no matter which country, and say, okay, which are the 5, 10, 15, 20 institutions with potential, and that you then do a lot of hand-holding at the beginning. Once they have been through the first 2 or 3 projects, they will themselves continue going on because they will have understood how things work. They've also understood what they can draw out of it. But I think the most important thing is the first step. Get them for the first time into the arena and give them the support that they know how to write a proposal, but also help them to get into the networking of the space community in Europe. So I was even at information days. I don't know how the information days will look in the future. Maybe they will be all virtual, and it will be easier for participants from smaller countries. But for example, I was also at information days in Lithuania, in Slovenia, in Portugal, where you could say, okay, the country is not so big, but what they did is, when they organized such information days, obviously the information days were all international. So you had regional participants, plus very often also participants from the member states who specifically went to those countries to get to know the potential cooperative partners in that country who could join their consortia. For example, when I was in Lithuania, there was somebody, a big company, a relatively big company from Spain, and they said, we have come here to understand who from this broader region, because it was the Baltics, the Ukraine, Poland, Finland, and so on, even from Romania, they had participants who said, I want to see who from this region that for me from time being is still not very well known, could be in my next consortium, and who has the capacity. And guess what? Today, all over Europe, you have either private companies or institutions that have capacities. You just have to find them. I think also in some member states, maybe there is too much bias towards existing institutions, and there is less support of new upcoming faculties or new upcoming companies, small startups that have some potential and that would need some handholding. So also bringing together established institutions and newly upcoming institutions would help to create this, as I say, community critical mass that would allow you then to participate in a call and say, okay, we have, let's say from our country, 6 institutions, and you can be happy if in the first year one or two get through, and the other ones will learn how to participate in the call. And then later on, you will have maybe double that come through. So there are some countries which are not big, but you have every year, let's say 1 to 3 participants regularly. On the other hand, I can tell you that even for big member states, it's not always a successful year for big member states. Some big member states struggled until they understood the mechanisms of Horizon 2020, and institutions from those big member states had a below average success. So even size and experience does not guarantee you, if you don't do your homework, to get your proportional share, although we should even speak about proportional share, because all our calls are based on, or the selection evaluation is based on merit. But let's say an expected proportional share, given that such a country has, as I said, quite a strong track record.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies a lot. And seems that we now have some questions from the audience, so I will try to read them for you. So there is a person named Aitohan. Sorry for the wrong possible pronunciation, but this person wants to know, can universities in Africa participate in Horizon 2020?
As long as their country is associated, yes.
Okay, thank you. So Remco Timmermans wants to know, he said that you briefly mentioned this, but what do you expect will be the options for consortium members from associated countries like the UK, Israel, and other non-EU countries in Horizon Europe?
So, okay, the UK, unfortunately, we don't know anything because the negotiation between the UK and the EU on the relationship between the UK and the EU are in full progress. So we will see by the end of this year what the status of the UK will be and what will happen. For the time being, it's really something that I cannot say anything about it. I suppose there will be an agreement because neither side wants to have a complete break of the relationship. But as I said, it's work in progress for the time being. If you are from an associated country, normally the association agreement gives you the same rights as if you were from a member state. So all the associate countries, and we had in Horizon 2020 quite a number. The number is growing, I think, from framework program to framework program. Basically, you're treated as if you were from a EU member state. So there is no limitation in terms of type of institution. It can be for-profit, not-for-profit, public research, private research, universities, faculties, universities of applied science. There is no limitations in terms of, as I said, legal status also. The main point is, can you actually contribute to the project? And do you have the operational financial capacity? Other limits are not there. From an associate country, at least until now, we have not had any problem to have somebody participate. There were no limitations. I could imagine maybe that in the future there's some security sensitive issues, but this would be clearly mentioned in the work program.
Okay, thank you. And we have the final question. It's rather a comment. Lucas is saying that they gave up applying. He said, we went twice through this process, and our lesson is that the process is set up with the wrong incentiveness and without sustainable intentions. Do you maybe have some comment on Lucas?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I worked before in entrepreneurship, and I worked a lot with small and medium-sized enterprises. And if you are a small and medium-sized enterprise or any type of small institution, you have limited resources, especially you have very limited staff. So if you go alone, or if you go in a consortium that does not have experienced partners, it is tough. On the other hand, we have a number of small or medium-sized enterprises and small institutions that are also successfully participating, and not only once, because usually you don't want to participate once. You want to have a pipeline of projects so that you are successful every year, every second year, every third year, that you keep your staff and your machinery occupied, and that you also advance in your project or product or service development. So I agree, and I fully understand what the gentleman means. But I also want to say the fact that a number of small, medium-sized enterprises have made it shows that it is feasible. But you have to do probably two things. One is go together with somebody who is experienced, so that you don't have to do the learning on your own, that you have some hand-holding. And the other element is, it has to be a conscious investment. So even if you are an SME with 50 employees, if you want to go down that road, you have to say, okay, I will invest into that, and probably 2 or 3 people will work on the project proposal writing, on putting together a consortium, or being in the putting together of the consortium, even if you're a junior partner. This is something where we have to consciously work on, invest on, and especially build the knowledge, the learning. Now, given that this is quite an effort, I'm going back to what I said a minute before. You do it because you want to participate in more than once, and make working in those European projects a pillar, a sizably chunk of your activities. Whether this is 20% of your turnover or 15 or 35, this depends on many aspects. But you do not go into this, let's say, half-heartedly. You do not go into this without experienced partners, and you do not go into this without being conscious that it is a medium-term investment and a medium-term effort. And I agree again, it is not easy if you're a small, medium-sized enterprise to make that decision. But some have made a business model out of it.
Okay, thank you. So obviously there are participants that are already familiar and they participated maybe more than once. But could you please maybe emphasize for those future applicants that they have no experience and maybe once more tell us how and where can we find more information? You were mentioning Commission contact point, so maybe just to point all future unexperienced participants where to find more information.
Yeah. So we have a portal which is called the Funding and Tenders Opportunities portal. It is very comprehensive, and we put together the funding, so the grant and the tender opportunities together into one portal to make it all available at one point. Obviously, putting together two portals has also made it a little bit more complex. But there has been also, and I think Horizon Europe will go even more down the road, a tendency to simplify as much as possible. Now, simplify as much as possible, you have to see it in a public institution context. We are accountable how we use public taxpayers' money, European taxpayers' money, and so we try to simplify, but on the other hand, we still have to make sure that the money is used in the best way possible. We have to show that we have had our precautions and that we have also to a certain degree looked at our applicants. So yes, we are simplifying it. Can it be super simple? In many cases, probably not, but compared to what has been in the former framework programs, it is and will be much simpler. But nevertheless, it takes time to read and to understand this whole thing. So what I said before, be careful and read a lot what we, as the European Commission, are publishing on our sites. Since you're inexperienced, talk to your national contact point who is normally experienced. They are not newcomers, and who can also then interpret for you what those rules and regulations mean. And they can also understand what this means, for example, compared to the last framework program. And the third element is, as I said, talk to those institutions, and if they're not in your country, you have to go out of your country, that have participated. Since everybody is looking for a partner, I think you will always find open doors if you come with an offer and show that you're interested, because they will be interested in getting to know you and understand who you are and what can you bring to the table. And once you've maybe been there, you might not get the invitation for the first time to join a consortium, maybe only the second time, but you will be on the radar. On the other hand, if you've been successful in a consortium, you'll very probably be re-invited to the next consortium and again. And so if you want to meet all those people, besides looking at the different sites of the projects, as I said at the beginning, each project has its site with the names and the contact details of the beneficiaries that are now running the projects. Those info days are probably the best market you can have. You have at one place sometimes 150, 200 different potential participants with whom you can meet, talk over a coffee, over lunch. As I said, we will see how things will evolve now. Maybe they will be easier in terms of that you will not have to travel. They might be a little bit more complicated in terms that you will not be able to meet face-to-face. But those info days, those conferences where you have the possibility to meet the community are the door openers and the markets for experience. So you have to go out, you have to do this, and you will come back with a lot of knowledge that you have to structure in your head and then see how to progress. But I think the transparency, especially now, where many pieces of information and contacts are available even through the web, you don't have to travel, are opening the door for inexperienced participants much more than it was possible 15 years ago.
Okay, thank you very much. It seems like that we have no further questions from the audience, so I would like Vesna to say closing words.
Mr. Curavić, thank you a lot for your presentation and great experience shared with us. I can say for us and all participants, it was very valuable and helpful for everybody interested in participation in Horizon 2020 program. With this, I thank you warmly once more, and also thanks to all of participants in this session, and I'm closing this session.
So very warm thank you from me. I hope it was useful, and I'm at everybody's disposal. You can also share with the participants my contact details, my mail address. Happy to discuss further if there is a need. And I think I'm as curious as you about the new work program and the new implementation modalities. Thank you, and hope to talk to you sooner or later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.